Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's episode-by-episode review of Season 5 of Bojack Horseman. This video is a part of a series of videos where I attempt to cover every single episode of Bojack Horseman, one season at a time. In this video, I will cover every episode of Season 5. So, for those who may be familiar with my channel may know that I actually have already done a video review for Bojack Horseman Season 5. I did it shortly after the season aired. It was, in fact, the first video I ever done for Bojack Horseman because I loved the season so much, it made me finally want to do videos about the show. Now, in that video, I stated that Season 5 was my favorite season of Bojack Horseman, and after watching this season, as well as the first 4 seasons, I think, I don't really want to make definitive statements like that yet, but I think I'm probably sticking to that. I think this, in my opinion, this is the most powerful of the first 5. Of course, I haven't rewatched 6 yet, which from recollection is quite powerful as well, but I think, I don't know, I just have fonder memories of this season. And it's kind of funny because I recently watched some reviews of this YouTubers who didn't like Season 5, which I personally don't get. And that particular person loved Season 4, which I already named as my personal least favorite season of the show. So maybe it appeals to different sensibilities. For me, what really gets me about Season 5, I think this is the first season of the show that really grabbed me and told me that this show had a lot of nuance and important things to say about life, depression, happiness, and a lot of powerful ways in which to tell them. And it's not just a silly comedy show. Now, of course, I was already aware of this to some extent with Season 2, Escape from LA, and Season 3 had a couple of powerful episodes, none the least being It's Too Much Man, and there was some emotional stuff having to do with Beatrice and Hollyhock in Season 4 as well. But to me, this season is what really drove that home. As I said, I wasn't as big on Season 4. I wasn't as sort of grabbed by the drama in that season. And with Season 2 and 3, it was just like 1 or 2 episodes, like That's Too Much Man or Escape from LA, that really hit me, where the rest of the season's more like a comedy. Whereas, in Season 3 there was a little bit more, but for me, the powerful storytelling that really speaks to the drama and really high, complicated, nuanced lessons or experiences and about the human experience, about what it means to find happiness or what it means to be a good person, that was present throughout the entire season. And I think, just my opinion, I think this season does a better job of mixing the drama and the comedy, whereas there's some episodes that had me crying and laughing within the same couple of minutes. Whereas I think other seasons, particularly Season 4, was a bit rigid, like here's a bunch of silly comedy and here's a bunch of serious drama, which seemed to sort of mismatch, whereas this season I think got the blend of it like perfectly, like perfected the recipe better than the other season before this. But I mean, particularly Seasons 1 and 2 were definitely way more leaning on the comedy. Even though there were some dramatic messages, even in the first couple of episodes of Season 1, which I had just recently rewatched as well, there was still, first and foremost, a comedy show that's meant to make you laugh. Whereas I feel this season, more so than even Season 3 and 4, was a serious drama show that also made you laugh. So let me go ahead and get into the episodes of Season 5, which is something I didn't do in my other review. I'll get into a few episodes, but I'm going to get into every episode this time and talk about Season 5. So let's start with the first episode of the season, the light bulb scene. Now, this, of course, is basically the intro to the season. It's going to ease you into the season, get you new. So the theme of the season, of course, is the show Filbert, that Bojack is filming this TV show, which was hinted at the end of season 4, that Princess Carolyn is producing this show with this Flip McVicker character who is voiced by Rami Malek, which I wasn't aware of at first, but now rewatching, I'm like, how could I not be aware? It seems pretty obvious to me now that that's Rami Malek. But anyway, so he's doing this Filbert show. And this also introduces his co-star Gina, who he has a long, season-long affair with, I should say. And I will be getting more into her and his relationship with her a bit later on. But this episode focuses mainly on how Filbert, the TV show character, is way too close to Bojack Horseman and his life. And it's like he's looking at himself through, like, playing Filbert reminds him too much of his own self. And it highlights all the things he hates about himself. And so that's why he hates doing the show. And I think this episode brings that out. Particularly it focuses on it, but it's something that actually the whole season does. And I think that's one of the reasons why the season is so fantastic. I think it does such an amazing job of comparing and contrasting Filbert and Bojack, and how it's all about Bojack is forced to deal with the negative aspects of himself that he would rather not deal with. And this, of course, leads to some really, really dynamic storytelling later in the season. But in this episode, it focuses more on Bojack trying to convince himself this show sucks. Like, he keeps complaining about every tiny little thing to Princess Caroline. Like, oh, what this happened, blah, 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 blah. And of course, this results in a fight between Bojack and Flip McVicker, which I think is funny that Princess Caroline's role in this, where she tries to sort of mediate between the two and acts like, oh, you're both saying the same thing, when they're clearly arguing with each other, which leads to some hilarious. But it's funny because it's true to Princess Caroline's character, that she wants so desperately for everything to work out. I mean, I just think it's powerful comedy because there's drama behind it. But anyway, it kind of starts out with Bojack, and this episode gets into some themes about sexual harassment or sexualization, which is another theme that's explored throughout the season, as this season came out shortly after the Harvey Weinstein scandal and the Me Too movement. So these are themes that will prop up throughout the season, and here it sort of shows up in the form of Gina, like, casually talking to Bojack about how she's objectified, about how she has to wear thin costumes in the cold that shows her nipples and stuff like that. And so Bojack, in his messed up way, I mean, it really shows that Bojack is well-intentioned in a lot of things he does, which is why I sort of fight back against this idea that Bojack is out and out a horrible, terrible person, because I think it's not just because he's the main character. I think there are aspects we are shown that he is actually a caring and loving person in some areas, and sometimes, of course, he fails miserably at that, mainly because he is a miserable person. But in this instance, he generally feels for Gina, and doesn't like the objectifying. But of course, the situation's a bit more complicated than that, and so when he tries to interfere, he ends up just making things worse. Like, I think the scene was kind of funny when McVicker was, auditioning a bunch of women and telling them that they're not beautiful enough, they don't look good enough for the part, and they're supposed to be beautiful and haunted. And he was like really tearing this one girl down, saying that she's ugly, and he's like, oh, that's the haunted look I'm looking for, which is but so he's being, in fact, he even has a line to Bojack, is like, can you pardon me while I judge these women's bodies? But then when Bojack comes in and says that the stripper scene objectifies women too much, McVicker's like, you know what, you're right. All right, girls, you're all fired. We're getting rid of the scene. And so they're all grumble and complain. I'm like, how am I going to feed my kids? So it's showing like the nuanced side of that. And of course, by saying that, he that gives McVicker the idea for Gina to do like a fully nude scene, which makes her experience even worse. And Bojack is like, upset over that, and so he argues with Flip even more. But of course, this causes Flip to have Bojack do the nude scene instead, and even confronts Bojack as like, well, if you don't want to do the nude scene, that's fine, but you have to admit that you don't care about objectifying women and you're just complaining to hear yourself talk, which puts Bojack in the bind, which has him wanting to come up with these schemes. One of my favorite bits that I love to death is how he takes the rolling chair that spins around with him everywhere because he wants to find Princess Carolyn. He goes to Princess Carolyn's apartment, but it's actually Todd who comes home. He goes, Princess Carolyn, and it's so he tracks her down and finds her at the adoption agency and grabs the chair in his car and puts it out and spins around. I absolutely love that. I think it's a hilarious joke. But this is the scene in which Bojack comes clean that he doesn't want to do the show because he hates Filbert, because Filbert reminds him too much of himself. And Princess Carolyn is like, look, you can put on the costume when they in front of the cameras, you can pretend to be this other guy Filbert, but when you rap, you take off the costume and you're Bojack, someone who's completely different. Which, again, this is like a running theme to the season, is that, and accumulates beautifully, which I'll get to later, is that's his intention, but he can't really do that because he gets too intertwined with the character. And of course, the other running joke, which was a bit on the nose, but I still think it's hilarious, is that the set for Filbert looks exactly like Bojack's house. And I love how Bojack was like, why'd you model this after my house? He's like, this isn't your house. This is a house of someone who's lonely and depressed and lives on top of the hill to distance himself. And he's pretty much describing Bojack. But, of course, he's meaning it in a way to describe Filbert, so it's another way to show how similar these two characters are. And of course, at the end of the episode, he reconciles with Filbert because he does the noon scene and he actually likes it and he doesn't have an issue. And so he throws a party at his house, and McVicker shows up and is like, oh, wow, your house really does look like the set. Which I do like. I like that someone actually acknowledged, because they've done this running joke from Bojack many times before with like Vincent Adultman or that communist spy or whatever, where there's something that Bojack noticed that everyone else is completely oblivious to, and so they started that with the whole thing about the set looking like his house. But then this time they actually bring the character around to acknowledge that Bojack is correct, whereas with the other things like the communist guy and Vincent Adultman, they never did that. Like, everyone went on like not noticing the obvious that Bojack notices. So I do like the subversion of that joke, or the different form of that joke, where they actually have Flip acknowledge that, yeah, your house does look like they're set. And it ends on a really interesting note where Flip is talking about how this is going to be a great season of television and that he's going to take him places he doesn't realize, but Bojack is just looking at the dancers who are exactly the same as the dancers that were on the Filbert set. And he's haunted, and I think he's haunted because he realizes that this is a bad idea, that this show is hitting too close to home. So I thought this was a really funny episode. Of course, there's also plots about Princess Carolyn trying to adopt, and Todd and his new girlfriend, which they have nothing in common except they're asexual, which they'll get into a bit more later. And there's a scene with Diane and Mr. Peanut Butters that are recently divorced, but we'll get more into that later as well. So I thought this was a great first episode of the season, so I really liked it. So anyway, we get into the next episode, which is The Dog Days Are Over, which is a Diane episode, and it gets more into her feelings of sadness and over the divorce of Mrs. Peanut Butters. And they show her crying at the start of the episode, and the episode is entirely out of sequence, which is an interesting way to play because they have it in the form of her doing like one of those top 10 girl cruise for her website thing, these top 10 lists or whatever, and it's all about her going to Vietnam to try to get over her divorce. And I kind of like the joke about how there's Laura Linney is filming a movie about a recently divorced woman who goes to Vietnam to try to get over her divorce, which is exactly what Diane's doing. And I like at the end of the episode, she meets Laura Linney and asks her what happens to the movie, but then the movie is like ends up being some ridiculous Hollywood bullshit about like a secret agent and twins and all that shit. And so it's like a sneaky way to show that there are no easy answers, because Diane was looking for an easy answer. Oh, what happens in this movie so similar to my life? What happens to it? But it turns out it's just Hollywood nonsense, which is, of course, a meta statement on Hollywood itself. Now, I thought this episode was okay, but I wasn't a huge fan of it. And to be honest, I don't really like the episodes that focus on the side characters, like Diane or Mr. Peanut Butters, or especially Todd or Princess Carolyn too much. I mean, sometimes they're good, but here's the thing with characters, particularly Diane in particular, more than the other characters. For me, the most interesting thing about her is her relationship with Bojack. So when they have an episode where Bojack barely appears, I'm less interested in it. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I wasn't as interested in her in season 4, because they barely showed her with Bojack. And this episode in particular, like, there are a few scenes with her and Bojack, and I did actually like those, but there were flashbacks of this thing was crazily out of order because most of the stuff was about her in Vietnam. And all the stuff with her in Vietnam, I didn't really care for that much. I mean, they were fine. Like, I think the running joke that everyone thought that she was Vietnamese and couldn't speak English was a bit dumb, particularly when they took it to the extreme where she met that Eagle guy and he was like, I'm American, and he's the whole time he thought that Diane couldn't understand her, and then he finds out that she was lying to him, and he felt betrayed, but honestly had zero sympathy for him. And I totally agreed with Diane. That guy was an asshole because he's a moron for not knowing, for just assuming she couldn't speak English, because he just went up to her and assumed she couldn't speak English, and all the time he couldn't detect that she was American, which I think so. I think he has no one but himself to blame. But anyway, and of course they reveal at the end of the episode that Diane saw Mr. Peanut Butters kissing someone, and that's why she was crying at the start of the episode. I've been through a rough divorce myself, and I could relate to this episode in the manner of having to rediscover and re-find yourself after a divorce and sort of relearn who you are because you no longer have the context of the marriage which defined your life for so long. So I do relate to it in that manner, but on the other hand, like, I don't know. I just wasn't as enthralled with this episode. So it was decent. It was fine, but yeah, that's about it. So anyway, let me get to the next episode, which is a planned obsolescence, which is it's a really silly episode. So this deals with Mr. Peanut Butter's new relationship with Pickles, and how like zesty and silly she is, and how they go to watch this space station be blown up just for a planned obsolescence, and they're listening to a podcast of Diane basically trashing Mr. Peanut Butter's, which is, and some of the gags about them, oh, this isn't a date, and they go to KFC, and it turns out to be this like really fancy romantic restaurant like that. I don't know. I didn't really get that. And of course there was also the plot, which I do kind of appreciate, even it kind of like it and am annoyed by it at the same time, because I don't like Todd, and I'm referring to the Todd subplot of him and his new girlfriend who's asexual having a dinner, with her family, with their parents, and their parents really, really want them to have sex, and they're trying to hide the fact that they're asexual from them, of course. And I appreciate this gag because it is, of course, a huge like subversion of the typical cliche storyline of like a young couple going to the parents' house and they're wanting to have sex, and they're trying to hide it from the parents who are big prudes and don't want them to have sex. Where they do the inverse of that, where the parents like porn stars or like sexual psychiatrists or whatever they are, and they're just all about sex, and they insist that they have sex in their house, and so they have to pretend like they're going to when they really have no interest in sex. But so I like that concept, and I think parts of it were funny, but it got too ridiculous for me, like with the lube, and they all start slipping and sliding, and the lube was spilling out of the barrel, and the dude's like, plug the lube with your erect penis. Like, that's stupid. I'm sorry, I didn't appreciate it. Although there is one joke in the sequence I absolutely loved, is that Yolanda and her sister, when they're doing the hijinks, pretending to be each other and talking to Todd, they kept saying, and coming up with these schemes, they kept saying, oh, when the cock crows at midnight, this will meet at this place. And Todd was like, who is this cock you keep talking about? And then later in the scene, they show like the rooster guy walking down the street saying, I'm crowing, I'm the cock, it's midnight. Like, that was hilarious. I did appreciate that a lot. So yeah, I was hot and cold on the storyline at the same time. I found it funny and good and annoying and bad all at the same time. So, whatever. We also got the storyline with Bojack. What was he? Oh yeah, he found out that Gina was into musicals and singing. So again, this is about him. Whenever he tries to do something nice for her, he ends up making things worse, which is an interesting turn. Like, he thought he was being such an awesome guy by getting her an audition to sing, but it turns out that she's actually a terrible singer. And she just embarrasses herself. And Bojack ends up feeling shitty for trying to help her. Now, at first, of course, he's just mocking her and making fun of the fact he sings, but then he thought, well, why not be a good guy and actually try to help her achieve her dreams? And he actually just makes things worse. So that was a pretty interesting storyline too. So overall, this episode was good. I think overall, I like this episode. Is not great or spectacular, but it's good. Alright, so let's go ahead and get into the next episode, which is Bojack the Feminist. This episode, of course, gets more into that aforementioned Me Too movement type commentary. And it starts out, of course, with a Mel Gibson analogy, because it introduces the character of Vance Wagner, who is really despicable, and he's done a lot of terrible things. Like, it starts out with showing him doing like this, having this run-in with a female cop where he's very disrespectful and says that I'll honk her boobs, and then she of course tackles him, and he's like, I hate Jews, for no reason. Now, I've heard that the showrunners say that Vance Wagner was specifically an analogy for Mel Gibson because apparently something to do with the studio or the producers that run them also did something like with Mel Gibson, and he was very upset about this and didn't want them to do it, but was told to shut up. So that's kind of why there's a lot of jokes about Vance Wagner being forgiven too easily and forgiven all the time, even though he does all this crazy shit, which is a clear analogy to Mel Gibson. Now, it doesn't seem to go, and I don't know when this episode was made, but it doesn't seem to go along with the whole cancel culture thing that was going on during the Me Too movement, where it seemed like people were getting really, really stricken down and their careers being threatened over sometimes minor instances. Because, let me be clear, there's people like Harvey Weinstein, who is despicable, who is a rapist, who's going to jail and deserves to, and people like Kevin Spacey, who absolutely deserve to be canceled because of all the despicable things that he did. But then there's other instances like Aziz Ansari, where in his case and some other cases, it was more of like a bad date than sexual harassment. And so it did seem like the internet was turning into like trial by popular opinion, which some other shows actually touched on, like The Orville, that had that show where someone did something unpopular and they went to this whole planet where if they did something unpopular and they're judged by the masses, then they were lobotomized or something, which I think had an interesting spin. But this episode took a different direction because it's focusing more on it kind of focused on that, you could do horrible things and Hollywood would still forgive you, which ask Kevin Spacey or Harvey Weinstein if they've been forgiven or if they're going to be forgiven. But then you have someone like Mel Gibson, who does, after a while, like after years of being shut out. And so, yeah, it's taking that approach, but it is taking a very interesting approach on feminism, of course, because it's saying that no one listens to them unless it comes from a man, which is how you have Bojack the Feminist. In fact, that had that one scene where Diane and Princess Carolyn were talking and be like, wouldn't it be great if we're able to say these statements about how women are objectified and how they deal with sexual harassment without being shouted down and told they were too emotional to shut up. And it says, the key is that it comes from a man. And so they use Bojack as their feminist symbol, which, I mean, I love the commentary there, by the way, which it is definitely true to an extent, that people don't take feminism seriously unless it comes from a man or whatever. If the woman, it's just being emotional, whatnot, which is a huge problem, definitely. But of course, this episode doesn't show Diane or Princess Carolyn as being perfect either. Well-intentioned, sure, but I like how, because they're trying to use Bojack as the symbol, and clearly Bojack doesn't give a fuck. He just likes the attention, as always. And of course, like at first, Princess Carolyn wants him to work with Vance, so she wants him to forgive Vance and publicly say, that he has nothing wrong with Vance. But then once Vance slights Princess Carolyn by refusing to do the show, then she wants to go full on after Vance, which really, really shows her intentions as maybe not being the most pure or honorable. In fact, Diane even calls her out on that. But anyway, at first, Princess Carolyn wants Bojack to go on the Squawk show to forgive Vance, but Bojack is just loves the intention, loves the fact that people were looking at him positively, and so he just gets caught up and starts, saying all this bad shit about Vance and saying that, trying to promote himself as a feminist. And of course he has a line where he says, of course you shouldn't choke women. Choking women is bad. Hold on to that thought for later in the season. But, so he he doesn't actually know what it means to be a feminist, or actually cares about the plight of women. He just loves the attention. He's like, wants to wear this shirt saying feminism is bae and all this bullshit. And so when Diane like sits down and tries to teach him all these things, which I think she makes some really, really great points in that scene, Bojack is like, I know you're trying not to be boring, but you are being boring. Like, and it shows, like, I don't think it shows that Bojack is an asshole. It shows that he doesn't actually care. And it's interesting also the scenes between Diane and God, what's her face, the publicist from season 3, Anna Vokoflia, or whatever you call her. How Diane tries to sort of shame her and be like, how can you defend a person like Vance Wagner? Like, you try to justify it in your own mind, but you must know how disgusting he is. And she's like, you know what, Diane, you've given me a lot to think about. So the next time she appears, Diane, and she actually just shows up in her car, and I like that running joke, but she's like, hey, I fired Vance Wagner. I no longer work for him, but you know what? You given me a lot to think before, woman to woman, so let me share something with you. And she plays the tape of Bojack confessing to his encounter in New Mexico, which has happened all the way back in the premiere episode of season 3. And I said at the top of my review of season 1, part of the reason why I love the show so much is because of the continuity. And there's a lot of continuity in this season that calls back to events of earlier seasons, which I love to death. And of course, I mean, this tape, they held on to it for 2 years, and it finally came back. And of course, it's kind of, Anna is being really sort of backhanded here in her own way, because she's kind of showing Diane that she's being a hypocrite. Because she scolded Anna for supporting Vance Wagner, but then she's saying, well, this is the guy you're supporting, and he's not much better. But of course, the show gets into a lot of the comparisons between Bojack and Vance later on in season 6, and I do think at heart, not just because he's the main character, we know him better, but I think Bojack is a better person than Vance, and that he's not as terrible as Vance is. But I will get more into that in season 6, because I think there they make it more clear. But for now, you could see that the two of them are a lot similar than what they were making out to be before this moment in this episode. And this is kind of a beginning story arc for Diane for the rest of the season, the way she sort of sees Bojack, because this is a sort of cathartic, jarring moment for her that maybe she doesn't really know who Bojack is. Maybe she is just as bad as Anna is for supporting Vance. And I think that's a really powerful moment. Yeah, so, and of course Vance comes out and says that he tries to act like he's the feminist now, and saying that he doesn't want to work with Bojack because the show Filbert degrades women. Which, again, it's funny because it's something that Bojack himself addressed it in season 1 and was overruled. So, I don't know, I heard another reviewer saying, oh, Vance actually has a point here. I am not so sure about that. I mean, kind of does, but then is Filbert being a show that kind of portrays women in a bit of a objectified light? And it's kind of up to interpretation, really, if Filbert is that bad with its portrayal of women. I think a good argument could be made that it is, but that doesn't even compare to all the shit that Vance has done. So for him trying to pretend like he's this big feminist now because he's against Filbert is, I think, total bullshit, and I don't think he has a point at all. Especially considering that Bojack himself tried to tone down some of the sexuality and Filbert, and was sort of strucken down by the showrunner and humiliated, or attempted to be humiliated because of it. So, yeah, I don't think Vance does have a point, honestly. But anyway, I really like this episode. I thought it was a really powerful, good episode. A lot of good, poignant social commentary. Anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is Amelia Earhart's story, or the Amelia Earhart story, which I don't know. This episode's okay, I guess. I think it's clearly my least favorite of the season. As I said, I'm not as interested in these episodes that focus more on the side characters without Bojack. And, I mean, the storyline about Princess Caroline trying to adopt, I mean, that's somewhat interesting. I mean, it's good for her, but I wasn't really that, and particularly her backstory, like finding out that she, was poor and housemaid and had an affair with this rich guy, and it was going to be her saving grace, but she had a miscarriage, and so her mother was saying, oh, it's her fault, blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't know. I didn't really care that much about it. To me, it's not really Bojack, the show, at its best. It's kind of like, yeah. But what really bugs me about this episode the most is that some really important things having to do with Bojack and Diane and Mr. Peanut Butter that happen in this episode that will have effects for these characters in the story throughout the season, but it happens like in the background and they don't focus on it. It just happens in between, because the whole episode's like Princess Caroline's point of view, and you get some phone calls when she's talking to him and they just mention oh yeah, by the way, Bojack wants to do this stunt, or Diane tries to convince Flip to do this stunt with Bojack and or Mr. Peanut Butter, and Mr. Peanut Butter's just like taking the limelight from Bojack, and Bojack's trying to show that he's better than Mr. Peanut Butter's, and then he ends up doing the stunt and he ends up like crashing and getting this huge accident, which causes him to take the pills, which is a huge story point for the rest of the season. Yet this all happens kind of over phone calls in the background. That actually, I gotta be honest, that annoys me. I think this shit should have happened in the foreground. I think at the very least they should have had a B storyline. Maybe they could focus on this Princess Caroline stuff in the A storyline, but flash back instead of just like casually flipping through it really fast through phone calls. I think that did a really huge disservice to the story, and honestly, I'm way more interested in that stuff than I am in the Princess Caroline story. Sorry. But, anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is Free Churro. Now, I guess I'll start by saying I do really like this episode. I do think it's a really good episode. But I feel like I really have to mention that I don't think it's a masterpiece. That I do think this episode's a little bit overrated. Because when this episode first aired, it was the highest rated episode on IMDb. And I think right now it's still the second highest, or maybe the third highest. But it's definitely in that top 3. And I watched a lot of videos that do like the top 10 episodes of Bojack, and this episode is almost always in the top 3. So it's a universally loved episode, like it's a masterpiece, like it's brilliant, it's one of the best things the show ever did. And I think it's a good episode, for sure. Definitely really great written, but I just don't think it's that good. I don't think it's a masterpiece. I think there's many other episodes in this show that are masterpieces, and this episode is frankly not one of them. I mean, it's a good episode, don't get me wrong. As I said, I do really, really like this episode. Now, if I do a top 10, I'm doing like a top 25 at the end of my coverage of Bojack Horseman. This episode will definitely make that top 25. It might make my top 10, I'm not sure, but it definitely won't make my top 5. So it's sort of just, you might see it splitting hairs, saying this is still really, really good episode. I just don't think it's a masterpiece like many others do, because I don't know, they tried to play it off like, oh, it's such a groundbreaking, interesting concept to have the whole episode be one monologue. I don't know. I don't really think so. Is it risky? Oh yeah, definitely. And they even had, apparently some people point out, they had a line in the previous episode where Bojack was talking about, well, there's too much dialogue in this episode. Nobody wanted to watch the show with someone talking the whole time. TV is a visual medium. And then in the very next episode is this episode, which I do kind of like that, the meta commentary and foreshadowing that the show often does. But here's the thing. I do think this is a really great monologue, and I think that the voice actor, Will Arnett, does a great job at delivering it, and the writer, of course, more importantly, did a great job of writing it and make it very poignant. This episode, it does a really good job of exploring Beatrice, her death, and how it affects Bojack, and how he's really conflicted about it, because on the one hand, he despises his mother, and because she was very abusive, if not physically, verbally, emotionally, really, really abusive, like almost like the worst you can get emotionally and verbally abusive, really. But at the same time, he's sad by her death, and he's kind of conflicted about those feelings, and he doesn't, and it explores, like someone pointed out, like several people, critics pointed out, that the theme of this episode is being seen, because you have the whole line about ICU, and how important Bojack found it that she actually saw him, but then of course he's debating maybe she didn't see him. Maybe she was just reading the sign of the intensive care unit, ICU. Or maybe she was just saying, oh, I see it, there you're there, just acknowledging that he exists or whatever, but it doesn't really mean anything. And I love the analogy that he brings up to like a continuity error in Horsing Around, where someone saw a cop on the set and was like, ooh, does it have greater meaning? Does that symbolize? It was like, no, man, this grip left his cup on set. And sometimes people find greater meaning when there is none, but does that really invalidate that greater meaning? So there's a lot of philosophical discussion here that I absolutely love. So as I said, I do like this episode a lot. I just think the episodes that do have interaction and dialogue are better than this. I'm sorry to say, but in this season alone, I think there are 4 episodes that are better than this, and just in this season, let alone the whole show. But I mean, that's just me. One thing I will admit that I really hold against this episode is the ending gag. Which I think that gag hurts this episode. I think it hurts it a lot, to be honest. And that's the gag that Bojack it was at the wrong funeral, and he wasn't, he was supposed to be talking about his mother, but he was talking about there's the iguanas or lizards or whatever the hell they are. First of all, that was so damn predictable. In fact, when the first time I watched it, I was like, oh, please don't reveal that he's at the wrong funeral. And when they did, I'm like, oh no, you fucking did it. Because it's so cliche, so tired. It wasn't, not only was it not funny, I think it does actively hurt this episode. First of all, Bojack, we, the viewers of this show, cannot see who Bojack is talking to because the camera or the point of view is focused on Bojack. But Bojack in the universe can see his audience. He can see he's talking to a bunch of lizards and iguana. Now, I suppose you could try to get all pretentious and say, oh, well, that's the point, is that he was so in his own head and brought up and everything, he couldn't see who his whole audience is. And to that I say, bullshit. I'm sorry, I don't buy it. And also, it's just such a stupid joke. In fact, in my first review of season 5, I mentioned it would actually subvert expectations if he actually ended up being at the correct funeral, because you just so expect him to be at the wrong funeral, because that is such the tired, cliche, obvious joke. So I'm sorry, I really hated that joke, like a lot, to be honest. But as I said, I still like some of the Like, I like his little jokes aside when he's telling these jokes and they had the person playing the music doing the or whatever, and he's doing it at the wrong times. Like, that was good. And in fact, how he says the joke one time where he takes it too far and it's like, "And my mom's a stupid bitch," and like, it shows like again, this is kind of a really good blend between the drama and the comedy, because it shows his pent up anger towards her, but yet he still seeks her approval. Yeah, so I do think this is a poignant, really good episode, and might make my top 10, but not my top 5. So it's not a masterpiece, but it is a really good episode. So, let me get into the next episode, which is Ent Sub, or Interior Sub, Stage Direction. Now, I often present my unpopular opinions, but I like this episode better. In fact, I loved this episode a lot. First of all, I mean, this is like really one of those things I was talking about, which is a really perfect example of blending the drama and the comedy, because I thought this episode was hilarious. I was losing my shit. With the gag of this episode, where it's about Diane's therapy, so I believe was introduced earlier in the season, and her meeting her wife for dinner, and her wife happens to be arbitrating this dispute between Princess Carolyn and Todd, and so they're meeting over dinner, and they're telling their stories about Bojack Horseman, the main characters of the show, but they can't use real names, so they just say Bobo the angsty zebra, and so then they have the opening credits come in, and the credits completely change as Bojack's zebra, and even the title sequence says Bobo the angsty zebra, which I fucking love. I think that is a brilliant joke, and I love the different characters out there, Princess Diana or whatever. The whole thing about Todd being a finger, hand, face, and Princess Carolyn being a mist, was it of a yearning or something? Like, that was too much. And I like how the characters in the episode even pointed out, oh, this is too much, it's too hard for me to follow these characters. But so they even acknowledged it was too much. But I absolutely 1000% loved the chocolate hazelnut spread. Mr. Chocolate Hazelnut spread instead of Mr. Peanut Butters, and he was like a black lab instead. That, I lost my shit at that. I don't know why it's such a simple joke, but I just thought it was the most hilarious thing ever. But then, and there's jokes within the episode about again, and they get into the drama, the long-lasting dramatic storyline about Diane not knowing how to talk to Bojack anymore because of the information that she found out about him, and how she keeps trying to avoid him, but and of course he's also brings up the fact his mother just died, and that he really, really wants sympathy for her death and wants someone to talk to him about it, but he has to put on this air like it doesn't affect him, so he keeps telling people not to, when very, very clearly he does want someone to talk to him about it. And then Mr. Peanut Butter Chocolate Hazelnut spread, finds out when Derek's like, oh, my mother's fine, she went to a farm, and she had that battle with leukemia, and then she went to this farm she's living, and they're like, I think your mother's dead, dude. He's like, no, she's not. Oh my god, my mother's dead. Like, that was an amazing joke. And then, of course, Mr. Peanut or Chocolate Hazelnut spread took the limelight away from Bojack, and everyone was condoling him on losing his mother, which is what Bojack really wanted, but it kind of was too fed up to do. And then the whole thing about him wanting to see the therapist, and the therapist, like, and he acting like they're just friends. Oh, this is our friendship hour. And as soon as, like, she admits it's therapy, he's like, yeah, I don't want to see you anymore. And again, it's getting to some of Bojack's pig-headedness and saying a lot of his issues are his own fault for trying to put on this air of being arrogant and perfect or whatever. And the side plot with Princess Carolyn and Todd, I didn't really care for it all that much because it was a pulsating ball of yearning or whatever. But the whole thing about the string cheese, like, it was a bit silly. Although I will say I liked the joke where the mediator is like, Todd, use I terms or I words, and he's like, I, you took my string cheese. I did like that joke. That was a funny joke. But other than that, I didn't care for that storyline that much, but it didn't interfere too much with my love of this episode because on top of all that funny, hilarious shit, you get like this really, really, really powerful scene at the end of the episode, which it just really hit me like a ton of bricks. Like I was just so like blown away. And that is when they come back from it. Takes place after the therapist and the mediator are having their discussion, so we see the characters as they really are. But we do see that the storyline that was before that had the different personas of the characters were the same thing. So it takes off exactly after that. Like Mr. Peanut Butter's acting like his mother's dead, and Flip is acting like he can't write the script correctly. And although, by the way, Flip was a dolphin before in the story, which makes a lot of sense. But anyway, I love this ending where Diane finds a way to write, because the whole thing is Flip couldn't figure out what to write, so they were just fucking around on set because there wasn't a script written. But Diane like starts writing and he gets this thing, and Flip's like, oh yeah, we're doing a great job. Where she's doing all the writing, and that's because she's finding a way to work in what she learned about the New Mexico thing into the script. And they're like, oh, we don't have time to learn lines, just to read cue cards. And so Bojack is reading these lines where he's reciting basically the recording that Diane heard, where she says that she's just 17, and they play out a scene on the sub that's similar to that. It has like a 17-year-old girl who's kidnapped for human trafficking or whatever, and she kisses him, and he's like, no, I don't want to kiss her. And then the director and Diane are screaming, kiss her. And then at the end, like, it's revealed, oh, they're on the USS New Mexico. And just the look that Diane gives him, and the look that he gives her, like, that he's pissed, like he's seething because he knows what she's doing, but she's so angry and pissed off, and the fact that he won't admit, that he won't talk to her, and he won't admit anything, and she is like so pissed off and kind of like gratified in a very like unhealthy way that he is aware of what she's doing, and she's kind of happy that she's pissed off. Her whole intention was to just sort of just show him up. And my fucking god, man, that scene is amazing. That was so damn powerful. I was so blown away by that. So this is a great episode. I fucking love this episode. Anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is Mr. Peanut Butter's Booze. And I wasn't as blown away by this episode, but I do really like it because I think this is the first time they really explore Mr. Peanut Butter's issues. This is why I kind of didn't like his bullshit storyline in season 4 with running for governor, because that didn't really address like that much of what was wrong. I mean, they do address it somewhat in earlier seasons, like how he is oblivious to Diane's needs, which leads to their divorce. But this gets even deeper into Mr. Peanut Butter specifically, rather than just his relationship with Diane, because, well, it explores his relationship with all of his ex-wives, and how they go to this Halloween party, and also how he's oblivious to Bojack, where every year Bojack's like, what are you doing at my house? And I do love... It's like a running theme, of course, throughout this episode, that how these characters are just repeating the same motions again and again, which I think actually really works. And there is some subtle differences, and I like how they have the 4 different time periods, like, and again, this is like out of sequence, where the 4 different time periods are intermingled. And you have some funny things like Jessica Biel being traumatized by a mummy because she didn't get the part from the mummy. Like, that was funny. But what I always think of with this episode is how Mr. Peanut Butter's in present day, it's like, how come every time we go to this Halloween party and when I meet someone, they're always fun and loving and adventurous, but then somehow they turn nasty and our relationship doesn't work out. It's like, what's the problem? What's the common denominator here? I have no idea. Which, it's him. Obviously, the common denominator is him, and it's great how he's so oblivious to us. Now, I don't want to get too much, or basically, I don't want to get at all into my personal life. But so I'll just say that this hit a personal chord with me. In fact, I always think about this episode when I'm thinking about specific people, and it always, watching this episode always reminds me a lot of my personal. So I relate to this on a really personal level, and it's something, frankly, I could do myself. I consciously try not to, but I think we all do it. Is repeat these same behaviors and not realize that we are the problem. And so I find that a really powerful message. So for that reason alone, I do really like this episode. And there are some funny gags, like Diane keep trying to leave, but everyone is blocking her and stuff like that. But I don't think it's the best episode ever, but it is pretty good. So we'll get into the next episode, which is Ancient History, which sees the return of Hollyhock, who's a character, as I mentioned, I really liked. When I first saw the commercials, the previews for this season, I was under the impression Hollyhock would be in it a lot, the way she was in season 4, so I was kind of disappointed that that wasn't the case, but I do think this was a really good use of her. Of course, this is the episode where they finally reveal that Bojack is addicted to these pills, to these painkillers, and I honestly didn't see that coming. But it's kind of obvious in a way, and it does make a lot of sense. And in that way, I do like how they kind of low-keyed his whole use of the painkillers up until this point. Where Hollyhock throws them out because she had her own trauma about her, Bojack's mother poisoning her, and so the rest of the episode, they're just going out and trying to find these pills, and Bojack becomes more and more desperate, and Hollyhock, it dawns on Hollyhock pretty much the same time as it dawns on the audience, like she's kind of the surrogate for the audience, that Bojack is an addict, that he's actually not in pain, which is proven when he climbs over a fence to get away from the police. And it's a sad, disturbing episode, because you can tell from this episode and earlier in the season when Bojack was calling Hollyhock in the middle of the night that he really cares about her as a sister, and that he really does love her in his way. But he kind of has a way of fucking things up, which of course he knows himself, which is why he tells himself he's a stupid piece of shit. But he continues to go down this direction of bad behavior, which of course what the whole show is about, at least this season, definitely. And it's really sad, the lengths he will go. It shows how addicted to these pills he is. Now it's like when some scenes are still really funny in this episode, like when he goes to Gina's house and looking for the pills, but he ends up getting back in a relationship with her and ends up like saying something meaningful to her, like she thinks, oh my god, no other man, usually it's a fling when I have these flings on set, but you actually still want to be with me. And it's sad because he doesn't. He's just using it as an excuse to get more pills. And then we get the return of Doctor Who, which again, they have a lot of really great quippy dialogue using that. Who wants to party? Although I do think it's purposely misleading the way he shows up going, who wants to party? But then turns out that he no longer sells those kind of recreational drugs and has straightened out. But I do really like that line where he says, oh, I straightened out after Sarah Lynn's death. I mean, what kind of person could go through a horrible tragedy like that and not have it change their life? And Bojack's like, oh yeah, sure, of course. But when obviously it didn't change him, as we see that he's still just as bad, in fact worse, because of it. So I thought that was pretty powerful. And the whole scene with the Detective Meow Meow, where it's, oh, I'm not a cop, where it was very obvious he was a cop. That was kind of funny, but then, yeah, so the ending, my fucking god, this ending was so damn powerful. Hollyhock is like, promise me that you'll only use those pills for pain, and unless you're in pain, you're not going to take them. He's like, okay, I promise. And so what does he do? He goes and gets himself purposely in a car accident. That was just, when I saw that, took my breath away. I was like, holy fuck. Like, that is some powerful shit. Now, if I remember correctly, I do believe this is the episode when they first introduced Henry Fondle, the sex robot. And I don't know, because these next 3 episodes are some of my favorites. Like, I love these episodes to death, but each of them features like a side plot of the Henry Fondle sex robot, which I don't know, I'm a bit more iffy with it, but it doesn't interfere with my enjoyment of these episodes enough, because I don't think it's a terrible storyline. I don't think, oh my god, Henry Fondle's awful, but it's kind of silly. As I said, I'm not really that into the Todd storylines, and honestly, I was a bit disappointed because I think this is the last time we see Emily, and I was hoping that they do something more with Emily and Todd's relationship, but it's clear like Emily wanted a sexual relationship with Todd, and that Todd actually did love Emily, but not in a sexual way. So he's trying to compromise in his own way. He comes up with the sex robot, and Emily points out that that's not going to work. Now I was hoping that they'd come up with some other system, like she mentioned. Oh, maybe I heard some asexuals do actually have sex, and Todd's completely oblivious to it. So I was a bit disappointed that this is the last time we see her, and they didn't really take this relationship anywhere. But instead, they take the sex robot in a totally different, outrageous direction. But anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is Head in the Clouds. And I love this episode, which I'm going to say for the next 3. I think all 3 of these episodes are some of my favorites of the entire show. All right, first of all, let's talk about Henry Fondle, because I think this is when he becomes the CEO of What Time Is It Right Now by saying, I want to be on top of you, and it's like, there's no one on top of me. Which he gets into a long-running joke with him saying obviously sexual things and people taking them in totally different directions, which, to be fair, I'm still not completely clear on the message behind that joke. Like, I get the joke, obviously, but I'm not really sure if it's trying to say something, or maybe it's not trying to say something, but if it is trying to say something, what is it trying to say exactly? I don't know, but it's a bit absurd. Now Henry Fondle becomes the new CEO of What Time Is It Right Now, and every time, it's such a coincidence, like every time he's saying random sexual shit, it just happens to fit perfectly into the situation that he's in, that people can interpret it in different ways. Like, give me more means he wants to renew the season of Filbert and get more episodes. I don't know, it's a bit silly, but anyway, so anyway, the reason why, I guess I'll just jump right into this, not beat around the bush. The reason why I love this episode so much is the scene with Bojack and Diane. As I said, like, the Bojack and Diane relationship is one of my favorite things about the show. And I think this is probably the most key scene in their entire relationship. And this scene, like, I was so, like, gut punched by this scene. I was so enthralled and just blown away. I think my mouth was hanging open the whole time. This is one of the most powerful scenes, if not the most powerful scene in the entire show, in my opinion. And I'm talking about when, at the Filbert Premiere, so Bojack makes a speech at the premiere saying, oh, the show is saying that we've done horrible, things in your lives, and I know I've done lots of horrible things that are in our lives, but everybody does, so it's okay. And Diane's just aghast by that being, and I think she even says, like, no, it's not okay that you're doing these horrible things, because you'll continue to do them. And so she confronts Bojack about this at the end of the premiere, saying that it's not okay. And then she even brings up New Mexico, and then Bojack gets, of course, really defensive and saying, stop trying to change me, I'm not your personal project. And here's the thing about this conversation, which I don't have memorized, unfortunately, but they both make some good points. Like, even Bojack, like, I think a lot of people, I think you're maybe too harsh on Bojack, even though the point of the show is he's not really a good person. This is what's brought up in the Feminist episode, where Bojack goes on the radio show and he says, oh, the point of Filbert isn't that he's a great guy. You're not supposed to, I think, cheer for him. You're not supposed to think he's a great guy. He's not a good guy. And that was obviously meta commentary about Bojack himself, which I do, of course, agree with. That's clearly what the showrunners are saying, that Bojack is not a great guy. You're not supposed to think he's a hero. But on the other hand, they present him in such a nuanced way as compared to some other characters like Vance Wagner, for example, who are truly despicable people. And other characters throughout the show, like that other hippopotamus guy from season 2 who was sexually harassing women. Like, that's, characters like that are obviously really, really horrible people. But Bojack is presented in a more sort of nuanced way. So he does make some good points about Diane just wanting, sort of treating Bojack as her personal project, and that Diane has her own issues that she's kind of taking out on Bojack, which is true throughout the season. But then again, of course, Diane makes some really great points in this, as well as how Bojack's just finding an excuse not to change, not to like, Bojack acknowledges that he is a horrible person, has done horrible things, and he even says how it haunts him, which is something the show's made very clear, that he's haunted by this, and he's self-deprecating because of this whole stupid piece of shit episode, yet he continues the behavior. Like, in particular, and this is where I completely disagree with Bojack, by the way, obviously, is the line where he says, no one has been hurt by the actions of Bojack Horseman more than Bojack Horseman. Which, I mean, there's a certain amount of truth. I mean, that statement's false, let's be clear. But there's truth in how much his own actions hurt him. Like, comparing it to other people, I think, again, Diane has a perfect retort to this, which I'll get to shortly. It's not true, but it is a good thing to point out how much Bojack's own actions hurt him, how living with this guilt is extremely difficult for him, and why, by the way, he's addicted to painkillers at the moment, because being alive is painful to him. But then, of course, Diane's retort is, what about Sarah Lynn? And God damn it, that was so powerful. I was like, fuck. Like, when she brought that up, and he's like, don't talk to me about Sarah Lynn. And he's like, how you had sex with her when she thought of you as a father figure, and then you went on the bender with her, and she overdosed, and she died, and you're still alive, your girlfriend's still alive, you're in a hit show. How are you better off? How is Sarah Lynn better off than you? Like, God damn it. That was one of the most powerful moments in the whole show. And again, continuity really calls back, as this show is really great at keeping that. God damn it, this is a brilliant show. Like, I was just so fucking blown away by that, and the fact that Diane was so upset and hurt by this encounter that she goes and has sex with Mr. Peanut Butters, which is obviously not a good thing to do. He's in a relationship with someone else and they're divorced, so it shows that she's not a perfect person either. But Bojack certainly has his own problems as well. And of course, Bojack, the other perfect thing I love about this scene so much is after this huge argument, the first thing Bojack does, take a bunch of pills, gulps them down. Like, that perfectly described Bojack, because that conversation was painful for him, because he had to live up to truths he did not want to live up, and he was confronted by someone he thought of as a friend, and so he just wants to drown that pain out in painkillers. And it shows how loopy he is, and he goes up to Gina while she's having an interview and kisses her in public because they weren't sure if they wanted to make the relationship public, so he's going full on this relationship with her. And this perfectly leads in to the next episode, the Showstopper. And I've said it twice before during my reviews of Bojack that this is the best episode of the show. Clearly this is the best. I'm going to say that the third time, so really I don't know what. Maybe I'm going to have to do a three-way tie. Because, god damn it, this episode is so powerful. It is so damn good. Now, I watched some review recently that didn't like this episode, and then they were trying to say that this is just a repeat of the season 1 episode. Can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but the one where Bojack does drugs with Todd and Sarah Lynn, which is a great episode, by the way. But I think that's the most nonsensical critique I've ever heard. This episode's nothing like this. The only similarity between that episode and this one is drugs are involved. That's it. That is it. I mean, in that, because this just, I don't know. I'm not gonna I could go on a whole rant about that, but this is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. This episode's like nothing like it. But anyway, this is a truly unique episode. And again, okay, so this harpens back to what I said at the start of the video when I was talking about the first episode of the season, that it's all about Bojack being sort of intertwined in the character of Filbert. And this, of course, is what the whole episode is about. And because of his pill popping, his drug taking, he literally gets confused and doesn't know what's reality and what's fantasy. And I just love the whole format of this episode and the way it's presented, how it has that, the opening credits is the opening credits to Filbert, and actually this episode gets more into the plot of the show Filbert more than any episode this season has so far, and intercuts between like Filbert and Bojack perfectly. And Bojack, of course, is pretty much acting exactly like the character Filbert. Now in his head he's being like a detective. Of course, part of it, of course, is due to the drugs, that he's literally getting these two personas confused in his mind, but also how, as I mentioned, the character of Filbert's already extremely similar to Bojack. Now, he starts to go off on this paranoid sort of rant that he gets his letter under his door saying, "I know what you did," or something like that, and he gets really upset about it. He's trying to figure out who's trying to harm him, and of course it turns out to be nonsense. And I actually love that. I think that's very powerful. That was just like a advertisement for this show, because it just shows just how far gone Bojack was, that he can't disseminate between reality, what's real, and what's and this gets more into, I think this episode more than the other gets into the real issues with drug use. I mean, of course there's episodes Sarah Lynn OD'd, but there's more dangers of drug use than just ODing, which this episode gets into perfectly. And particularly like opioids, which is a very common problem, particularly in sort of rich white communities, which is what this show deals with, Hollywood stars, and how, and it makes perfect sense for Bojack's character, as I said, that he's in pain all the time, that he would become addicted to these type of opioids, and it's showing just how much it's fucking with his life. But I love this storyline about how, and I like how they intercut with him. They intercut it with the Filbert stuff, which is brilliant. And then they have like him talking to the production assistant, where he's saying, having her take notes about who wants to kill me and wants revenge. And she's like, "Oh, okay, got it." Like, here's the thing about this episode too. not only is it really, really, really powerful commentary and really powerful drama, it is funny. Like, there's a lot of laughs to be had. And this is exactly what I'm talking about the perfect blend between humor and drama that the show, like, you can't really, almost can't discern them. Like, they're so intertwined with each other in this episode, and they work so well, which is not an easy thing to do. It's actually a really rare thing to do, and this episode pulls it off to such a brilliant extent. So Bojack is like thinking someone's out to get him, and he's talking to people like Mr. Peanut Butters and Princess Carolyn and Gina, and they all have their own shit. And he hears them, like, they're worried about their own shit, but he interprets that has something to do with him and someone's after him or after Gina, when really, like, for example, Princess Carolyn and Flip had the encounters with the popsicle guys, which I forgot to mention in the previous episode, which I thought was kind of dumb, but not enough to interfere with how great that episode was. But anyway, the popsicle guy, and so he thinks he's talking about that, or, Vic and Princess Carolyn thinks he's talking about that, but he knows nothing about that, so he thinks the popsicle guys have something to do with the conspiracy against him. And then he talks to Mr. Peanut Butters, and he's, of course, a really ashamed and like fearful to find out that he slept with Diane. That's what he thinks Bojack is talking about. So it's like the perfect like showcase of how everyone's kind of stuck in their own heads and they're worried about their own problems, and sometimes people will always think everything's about them when really it's just people who are dealing with their own shit. And there are some great examples of this in storytelling and TV and movies, and I think this is one of the best examples of that that really works. So, of course, Bojack continues to spiral out of control, and like you have some brilliant, beautiful scenes, such as when he's talking to Todd again. Todd has his own shit to deal with, and when Bojack confronts him, he thinks he's talking about that. And then, at the end of the scene, when Todd, like, it becomes a cardboard and just flattens, and like Todd's office like flattens out like it's a set, and that leads into the musical sequence, which, fuck, I love this musical. I'm usually not a fan of musical sequence. I talked about this in my review of the Old Sugarman Place, which I didn't like that. A lot of people think it's brilliant. I think it's pretentious. This one, I do think is brilliant. Because it's the whole, and it harpens back to like the very first season when Bojack gave that speech to Sarah Lynn during Horsing Around when she was still a young girl about it. Don't stop dancing, don't stop. You gotta show up because those audiences, they what make your life. And so they have this whole musical number. Of course, Gina is into a musical, so they have her doing it, pulling it off. And I love how they have a lot of different like characters Bojack knows, like Sarah Lynn and Herb and Princess Carolyn, but they're like other actors dressed up like them, which is there's a lot of like metaphors and commentaries you can see through this. Like, it's saying that he sees those people, but he doesn't really see them for who they are, which again gets back to the whole free churro thing about I see you, and how he doesn't really see those people. They're just caricatures in his life, and he's not really acknowledging them for who they really are. But then, of course, the whole song about don't stop dancing, and of course I'll get into the other version of this during season 6, which is just as amazing. But right now, for this version, which is also amazing, it's all about how he needs to keep putting on this show. He needs to keep putting on this act. He needs to get approval. He needs to get happiness. He needs validation from others. And fuck. And it was just so powerful. And I also like how, because in this delusion, she was singing with some popsicle dancers, and later when he's actually fighting with Gina, he's like, oh, you and your popsicle dancers. She's like, popsicle dancers. Like, again, perfect blend of humor and drama. And then, like, and I fucking love, god damn it, this is just so brilliant. It's I think this is one of the best episodes of television I've ever seen ever. Let me just put that out there, because it is absolutely brilliant, the blend when they cut between the scene of Filbert, where Sassy is revealing that Filbert and Fritz are actually the same person, and because the whole time they're saying that Fritz, played by Mr. Peanut Butters, killed Filbert's wife, but it was really him who killed his own wife, and he created this other personality, which is it's a very common trope in like TV and movies, like the Fight Club thing. But this is but the whole show is more of a True Detective type thing, which I was never really into that show, to be honest. But anyway, and how that's the intercut between that and Bojack, or Gina calling Bojack out for having pills everywhere and for being an addict, and Bojack being totally against that. And like the in that scene, he punches the wall. He's like, "Give me my pills!" Like, fuck, that is powerful shit. And they intercut that between the Filbert reveal, which is actually kind of good for the Filbert show, but it's showing how he's conflating the two, and the way it leads up perfectly to Bojack choking Gina on set. Like, that was, it's just, there's a brilliance in writing, it's a brilliance in editing, like, it flowed perfectly, and it got to that point, which is one of the most painful, powerful, tragic scenes to watch in this entire show, of Bojack choking Gina on set. Again, and I think this is why it was so important that they preface earlier in the season that you're not supposed to like and cheer for this character. As I said, I still do to a certain extent, and I think to a certain extent you're supposed to, and I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that, but not entirely, because you get a scene like this where he is doing something really, really despicable, and Gina says in the next episode he should be in jail, and he should have his whole career ruined. He should go to jail. This is an indefensible thing that he's doing, even though you could say, oh, he's drugged out, he has no memory of this afterwards, he wasn't in his right mind, blah 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 blah. But who told him to get drugged out? Who was taking those pills in the first place? Who was allowing himself to get to this point where he punched the wall and smacked it just because his girlfriend was threatening to take his pills away? He has no one to blame but himself. So he is downright not a good person. Quite a despicable person in this moment. But this moment was so damn powerful. And plus, it shows how not everyone else was doing the right thing in this moment either, because it became very clear to everyone on set that Bojack was not acting, that he was he was putting her life in danger, like she could have died. And Flip McVickers turned the camera back when he realized, this is a key moment, when he realized, somebody said, I think he's choking her for real. Flip's first reaction to that was turn the camera back on. And that really speaks to the low quality of his character. That his art is more important than someone's life. And Princess Carolyn does show concern. She says, Gina, honey, are you okay? And other people on set can see this happen, and they just look on in horror. And some of them just get their phones out and start taping it, which, is that the right reaction? Oh, this will make a good video to go on YouTube. Watching someone being strangled with their life in danger. So I think this speaks to a low quality of a lot of people, not just Bojack. And the only person who does show quality of character is Mr. Peanut Butters. Which I think is an interesting side of him. Because Mr. Peanut Butters has his flaws, which are explored in the season, as I talked about, and they'll be explored more in the next season too. he is very oblivious and not aware of his own flaws, and just is a happy-go-lucky guy to a fault. But he does really care about people. And so he's the one who, when he starts to realize this is happening, he's like, Bojack, buddy, we cut. And he's the one showing clear concern. And, of course, he's the first one to act. Like, when it becomes clear that Gina's in danger and that no one else is doing anything about it, he springs into action. Now, there's another grip and someone who also helps Mr. Peanut Butter, but you notice that he waited until Mr. Peanut Butter's act. Like, he had to act first until to really snap the other people out of it to help Mr. Peanut Butters to pull Bojack off. Which I think, and then it ends with the hallucination of him seeing that big floating balloon of Filbert, of Bojack, which really shows just how lost Bojack is in this moment. Oh my god, it's almost tearing up just talking about it. It is one of the most powerful scenes I've ever seen in any television show, film, ever. Just powerful. So, let me get into the finale, the final episode, the show, or the stopped show, rather than the showstopper, the stopped show. And this is another brilliant episode. I think it's the perfect follow-up to that brilliant episode, because Bojack I think this beginning of this episode, where Bojack has no memory of what he did, is so tragic, and is played off like perfectly, and it has like Princess Carolyn trying to do damage control, and the way she calls Bojack is like, Bojack, buddy, how you doing? What do you remember from last night? He's like, was I on set? But, like, it gets even more powerful when, she sets up this interview with the Biscuits or whatever, and Biscuits is all happy-go-lucky, blah, 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 and Bojack is kind of, this is going to be fun, but he's really oblivious, and he's finally like, look, Princess Carolyn, show me the tape, and she's like, no, you don't want to see this. It's like, come on, how bad could it be? Cut to, it's really bad. And I like how he calls out the trope that they're doing, because he's actually completely correct. And I think that was very clever writing. So then, of course, he watches the tape, and god damn it, this scene is so heartbreaking. I mean, it's a credit to the animation that in the cartoon horse, the talking horse, that they're able to really display the devastation on Bojack's face, the just absolute, like, I want to say, like, worst moment of his life, when he realizes what he did. When he's watching the tape, it's like, oh, look at me go, and then he's like, wait, I'm really, and she's really, and Princess Carol's like, yep, and he's like, oh, and just that it's such a tragic scene. That he realizes that because his whole fear in life is that he's a terrible person, and he has this video evidence that he's correct, that he is in fact a really terrible person. And so his first instinct, he goes to do the interview with Gina, and when no one's around, he goes to Gina, he's like, I'm sorry, and she's like, oh, you look good. She says, yeah, the makeup is covering my bruises. And he's like, I'm sorry. And then, as I said, she's like, you should be in jail right now. I want nothing more to do with you. So then his first instinct is like, look, let me confess. I'll go on. I'll say everything. I'll confess I'm a horrible person. I did a horrible thing. I'll face whatever consequences. And she's like, no, because her career is just, she's achieving everything she's wanted to achieve in her career her whole life. And she's afraid that if this comes out, it will ruin her career, and that she'll just be thought of the person who was abused by her co-star. And this is also, again, this gets into real life commentary about how victims of abuse would feel and why sometimes they would hide it. And it's a very, like, you hear all these assholes when people come forward, like, well, why did they come forward years before and stuff like that? But this is showing like the true nuance and how they fear how going forward with it would affect their lives. And so she makes Bojack promise not to mention anything about it. So they put on this farce during the interview that they're still in love. And she's, of course, a good actor and playing it up. But Bojack, you can tell, has hints of he really doesn't like doing that because he's feeling so incredibly guilty. And then you get the follow-up where he goes to Diane, which is a great follow-up after their big fight, after the premiere, where he's like, look, you're right. I'm a terrible person. I need you to do a takedown article on me. And she says, and again, this is one of the best, like, dialogue the show has ever done, where she says, no, I'm not going to do a takedown of you, because and he's like, I want to be held accountable for the things I did. And she's like, no, but that's not how it works. No one's going to hold you accountable. You have to hold yourself accountable. And he says, I'm a bad guy. I need people to know I'm a bad guy. And she says, there are no such thing as bad guys or good guys. They're just guys. And the problem with you is you think you want to be good, but there's no such thing as being good, or there's no such thing as being bad. And during this conversation, he gets those pills out. Because he's in extreme pain, and that's his go-to now. Take the pain away with the pills. But then he looks down at them and he realizes that the pills are making things worse. And so he goes to rehab. And you have that really great conversation with Diane where he says to her, he's like, why are you helping me? And she tells him the story about the friend who was all bitch to her and bullied her, but she still, when she was in need, she still helped because she was her friend and she cared about her, and which tied into the Bojack. And it's just some of the best, most touching moments of the show. I mean, cartoon comedy, silly comedy about talking animals. It's got such powerful stuff. And then there's a side plot about Mr. Henry Fondle, which is ridiculous and over the top, where Henry Fondle finally gets called out on sexual harassment, but by saying things that are clearly not sexual. When he's going around saying all this sexual shit, saying, I want to be inside of you and stuff, they just interpret it in different ways. And then when he says something that has nothing to do with sex, like low battery, it was like, insufficient power. She's like, oh, you think I have insufficient power? And then something like, I want to charge the battery or something. And she's like, oh my god! Or connect to power source is what he says. And then he gets called out for sexual harassment. And of course, all the sexual stuff he did say, people were, in retrospect, finally realizing that he was sexually harassing them the whole time. And I'm sorry, I guess I do see the comedy in this because I do find it funny, even though it's like really silly and over the top. But like when they're interviewing Todd, and he's like, "Well, he's a sex robot," and it's like, "You mean that metaphorically, right?" And I'm like, "No." That is funny. And then how they have the big wig, stereotypical rich asshole from the corporation with like stringing all these corporations together, and it's like, you can come work for me. And he's like, you know that he just got fired for sexual harassment. It's like, no, you look like a good young chap, which again, interesting commentary. And then of course it ends with the Of Mice and Men scene where Todd puts the sex robot down, which is played as if it's emotional, but the whole storyline was too silly for this to be emotional. Like, I love you, father. Like, It's ridiculous. Now, what I mean by I'm not sure what commentary they're making. I mean, some of the commentary is very clear, but I'm not sure what they're saying by the fact that Henry Fonda, when he was upfront with his sexual advances, no one took it that way, but when he had said something that had nothing to do with sexual advances, everyone started taking it that way. Like, I'm not sure what that whole thing's about. Maybe the only thing I can think of is could be his commentary on like Harvey Weinstein about how it was obvious that he was a sexual predator. He, like his assistants and everyone knew that he was doing this really, but everyone's just oblivious to it until later when it was made clear that he was, when he was actually doing it the whole time. They should have realized that before. I guess that could be the commentary they're trying to make, which would be interesting commentary at all. But I'm not a huge fan of the Henry Fonda stuff, but it doesn't bother me. Like, I don't think it sucks. Certainly not enough to interfere with how amazing and great the Bojack storylines are in this episode. And of course, there's another storyline with Mr. Peanut Butter's trying to come clean to his girlfriend, but he ends up proposing to her instead, which again gets into Mr. Peanut Butter's flaws a bit more, which will be explored the following season. But overall, a very powerful episode, and I feel like it's kind of an understatement to say that. So, those are the episodes of Season 5, which I think it's fair to say it's my favorite season of Bojack Horseman. So, let me get into my least favorite or worst episodes of the season and my favorite or best episodes of the season. And as for least favorite, there's only like two I would put in this category. My runner-up being The Dog Days Are Over, but that was an okay episode. But so for the worst episode, I'm going to go with the Amelia Earhart story. I mean, the stuff with Princess Carolyn trying to adopt, that's all well and good, but I don't think it's enough to sustain a whole episode, and I wasn't really interested in her backstory at all. I'm sorry, I didn't really find that interesting, and as I said, it actively annoyed me how important plot points for the season were just brushed over. Like, I think they should have been paid more attention to. Like, this is when Bojack first becomes addicted to the painkillers, and they kind of brush over it in this episode, so that kind of annoyed me. Anyway, best episode of the season is a lot harder to come by. We got Mr. Peanut Butter's booze. We got the light bulb scene. But then you got even better episodes like Bojack the Feminist and Ancient History. But then you have four amazing... Oh, and Free Churro, of course. Gotta mention Free Churro. Everyone would hate me if I do. That's definitely deserves a mention for the best. But then you have four amazing episodes, which I think may be four of the best the entire show has done. You got Int Sub, you got Head in the Clouds, and you got The Stopped Show. But for best episode of the season, I'm of course going with the Showstopper, which was an absolutely masterpiece. It was a masterpiece. The whole way it blend. I love like stories that blend reality with fantasy and kind of mix them up, and I think this does some of the best job. If you're a Star Trek fan, you watch my Star Trek videos, the episode Frame of Mind is one of my favorite Next Generation episodes because that's about Riker going insane, blending reality and stuff, and I love that episode. But I think this episode does it better. I think this is a better example of that, and I just think it's well earned, as it was built up to throughout the entire show, was kind of building, and it's so damn tragic. It is so tragic and messed up, and it shows like the dangers of Bojack's destructive personality combined with a opioid addiction. And it's also a funny episode. Like, it manages to be so incredibly powerful and funny at the same time. The humor never interferes with the drama. It's, as I said, it's a perfect blend. So it's an achievement. I think it is a masterpiece, to be honest. So Now it's time to give my rating for Bojack Horseman Season 5 out of 10. And I, of course, am going to give this season a 10. The best. I think this season is an achievement. There's a couple episodes I think are kind of bland. Some storylines, like with the whole not trying to have sex, or the sex robot thing, which were kind of, I don't think they're terrible, but they're kind of, but there's just so much good. Like the through storylines throughout the season of Bojack getting the character of Filbert mixed up, and how because it's a symbol of how terrible of a person he is, and he wants to reject that, but it ends up becoming a part of him because of his efforts to avoid pain, which actually make things worse. And Diane's character journey of realizing that she's supporting and propping up the type of terrible person that she rails against in other cases, and coming to terms with that and having that epic confrontation with Bojack, but then at the end being there for him as a friend because she knows that he needs it. It's just brilliant, powerful stuff. Is what really got me, and this season is really what got me to acknowledge that this show is a masterpiece. So, that's it for my review of Season 5 of Bojack Horseman. Thanks so much for watching this. I shall be back next month for my coverage of Season 6. Now, Season 6 was aired in 2 parts. They had 8 episodes first, and then a couple months later they shared the other 8 episodes, so that made me had to decide, do I want to review Season 6 in one video, or do I want to split it up and do half and half? I ultimately decided just to do one video for the whole season. It's a longer season, so it's probably going to be a really long video, but hey, I'm just going to go for it. Anyway, be sure to check out my channel for that. Keep an eye on my channel for that. Also, check out my channel for many more reviews on other shows like Star Trek, Lower Decks, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that. Thanks a lot for watching.